The metal doors slammed shut with a deafening force that reverberated through the concrete corridors, shaking the very foundation of the prison. The sound echoed like a warning, blending with distant guard commands, the clatter of keys and low murmurs from men who had long given up hope. Shackled and silent, a new black inmate stepped inside, his movements slow, deliberate, and measured as if each step had been calculated in advance. Unlike the other newcomers, his face revealed no fear, no hesitation, and no arrogance, only an unsettling calm that made observers pause. He didn't flinch at the harsh light or glance nervously around the hall. He simply walked forward, fully aware of the dangers surrounding him. Every eye in the corridor followed him, trying to dissect the meaning of his quiet composure. To the untrained, his stillness looked like submission, but in reality it was a carefully cultivated shield. Whispers began to ripple through the block almost immediately, spreading like wildfire among the prisoners. In a place where weakness is preyed upon, newcomers are always the first targets, and everyone watched with anticipation to see who would falter. Some smirked openly, already placing bets on how fast he would break under the pressure, while others exchanged quiet, uneasy glances. A few noticed something unusual in the way he carried himself. His shoulders were relaxed, his movements precise, and his breathing steady, as though nothing could shake him. Most, however, saw only what they expected, another black man thrown into a system designed to break him into pieces. From across the yard, the gang leader leaned casually against the railing, his sharp eyes narrowing as he observed the newcomer. To him, this wasn't a man with a history or identity, it was a perfect opportunity to assert dominance. The gang leader had built his empire on one immutable rule: crush them early before they grow a spine. New inmates were reminders that he controlled every inch of this block, and any challenge would be dealt with quickly and publicly. The newcomer's calm, solitary demeanor made him seem like an ideal target, someone who would bend under intimidation without much effort. Around him, the gang leader's crew laughed softly, understanding without words the silent plan taking shape. The leader's reputation had been forged in fear, intimidation, and calculated acts of violence, and he expected nothing less than total compliance. Yet what none of them realized was that the quiet, measured steps of this man were not born of fear, they were the result of decades of discipline. Every ounce of stillness carried a warning the leader was too arrogant to recognize. As the inmate was processed and led into general population, the tension in the air became almost tangible. Muted racial slurs floated through the corridors, and whispered jokes circulated about how quickly he would break. In a prison where survival depended on dominance, his silence was read as weakness by nearly everyone, including the guards. They barely acknowledged him, seeing him as just another number in the system, a body to be processed and forgotten. No one asked his name, his story, or his intentions. Every step he took seemed to draw invisible lines, and every glance from others tried and failed to measure him. And yet, he remained completely unreadable, a man with nothing to prove and everything under control. What the prison couldn't see was the lifelong preparation behind that calm exterior. Years of brutal training had honed his body, mind, and spirit, teaching him how to master balance, breath, and restraint. He had spent endless mornings in silent practice, learning that true strength is quiet, patient, and invisible until required. He had faced opponents larger, faster, and crueler than anyone within these walls, and he had defeated them all through precision, timing, and control rather than rage. When he stepped through these prison doors, he had made a personal vow: no fights, no impulsive confrontations, and no wasted energy. Each step, each breath, each glance was calculated for endurance and survival. What they mistook for fear was, in truth, a calm that would soon prove deadly. Prison life, however, does not allow neutrality for long. Silence is often seen as disrespect, and calmness can be mistaken for weakness by those who thrive on chaos. The gang leader misread the inmate's patience as submission, believing that every man eventually breaks under pressure. By choosing him as a target, he had unknowingly triggered a trap of his own creation. Forcing a disciplined warrior into confrontation rarely ends as expected. Every observer assumed the newcomer would crack, yet every insult, shove, and challenge only strengthened his resolve. The first moments of tension, it seemed, were just the surface of something far deeper. The initial test came in subtle ways rather than outright violence. Assigned a thin mattress in a crowded cell block, he noticed every movement, every whisper, and every glance around him. Conversations stopped as he passed, eyes following his every step with growing uncertainty. The unspoken expectation to react, to fight, to shout, to show fear was constant, but he did neither. Instead, he unpacked carefully, folded his blanket neatly, and settled onto his bunk without a word. That simple act of order and composure was noticed by all, making him an anomaly in a world where chaos is the norm. Even small gestures spoke volumes, and the prisoners quickly realized that calm could be more unsettling than rage. By the second day, his meals began disappearing. By the third, someone shoved him hard in the corridor, testing his balance and reaction. Each time, he adjusted calmly and continued walking, unfazed and unprovoked. Laughter and mockery followed him down hallways, yet the more they pushed, the more they learned that their tactics had no effect. Calm men are unpredictable, and unpredictability breeds confusion and fear among those accustomed to control. The gang leader, observing from the upper tier, began to grow impatient. His reputation for dominance had never been questioned, yet here was a man who refused to conform. Every subtle move, every measured pause, chipped away at the certainty of his control. The gang leader decided to test him directly, sending a subordinate to deliver a warning rather than a threat. At dinner, the man blocked the inmate's tray and casually demanded payment for protection. The inmate studied the finger blocking his meal, looked into the man's face, and without a single word slid the tray back and walked away. No argument, no resistance, no emotion, just absolute calm. The crew misinterpreted this as confirmation of weakness, spreading rumors of an inmate who would fold easily. Behind the scenes, however, the newcomer was calculating, memorizing positions, weaknesses, and the daily rhythms of the prison. He wasn't surrendering. He was preparing. Every insult and confrontation became a lesson, every shove a reminder of control. He mapped out patterns, who watched, who acted, who hid, and who would step aside at the right moment. Guards, gangs, and blind corners were all cataloged in his mind. His mentor's words echoed constantly. Endurance reveals truth. Impatience exposes weakness. He absorbed the energy of the block like a student observing a battlefield. Every calculated move preserved energy for the moment it truly mattered. In a world ruled by chaos, preparation became his armor. The gang leader grew increasingly frustrated when his usual tactics failed to intimidate or provoke fear. Curiosity began to replace ridicule among the other inmates, who whispered not in mockery but in speculation. His unpredictability undermined the leader's control and provoked questions the crew could not answer. By the end of the week, subtle tests no longer sufficed. The next move would be public, a forced confrontation designed to elicit a reaction. Both anticipation and tension radiated through the prison, creating a charged atmosphere that everyone felt. The inmate's backstory, unknown to those around him, had prepared him for this moment. Growing up in a violent neighborhood, he learned early to survive, making split-second decisions and observing every detail. Violence surrounded him, and strength was often equated with loud aggression. He almost succumbed to that world until he met a mentor who taught him restraint, patience, and discipline. The martial arts school above the closed grocery store was humble, with no flashy signs or trophies. His training began with stance, breath, and focus rather than strikes. While others sought brute power, he cultivated control. Over years of relentless training, his body hardened, but his mind became sharper still. He competed in underground tournaments, mastering technique over raw aggression, never losing a challenge not through cruelty, but precision. Life intervened abruptly, however, forcing him into the prison system despite his discipline. He buried his past and chose invisibility as a survival strategy. Revealing skill invited testing, and testing invited danger. Silence became a shield, restraint a weapon, and observation his primary tool. Every insult, shove, or provocation reinforced lessons learned over decades. The gang leader, blind to the inmate's true nature, escalated his provocations. His power had never been challenged by patience or discipline, only by chaos, which he always defeated. By underestimating the inmate, he inadvertently walked into a situation he could not control. The first real confrontation came in the showers, wet floors, limited space, and no witnesses to intervene. Two men blocked the inmate's path, shoving him to provoke a reaction. He recovered instantly, a small adjustment keeping him balanced and composed. A punch glanced off him, and instead of retaliating, he stepped back with open hands, signaling caution rather than aggression. Confusion rippled through his assailants, and the gang leader, hearing reports of the encounter, interpreted it as fear. The next confrontation was scheduled for the yard, where witnesses ensured maximum impact on reputation. The inmate sensed the change immediately. Movements slowed, steps were deliberate, and the air grew tense. The gang leader approached, flanked by men whose confidence relied on intimidation. Mockery and insults were shouted across the yard. The first strike came, fast and violent. The response was faster, precise, and deliberate. What followed was not a brawl, but a lesson in control, balance, and efficiency. Attacks were deflected, momentum stolen, and men dropped without excessive force. Silence replaced chaos, leaving the yard stunned. The gang leader froze, disbelief spreading across his face as the myth of his untouchability cracked. Fear flickered for the first time, not of injury, but of losing control. The inmate stepped back, calm, silent, and unaffected. Power shifted instantly, respect replacing intimidation. Stories of the encounter spread faster than rules could enforce. Guards arrived too late to intervene, and the prison absorbed the lesson with reverent fear. The gang leader survived, but never regained the same dominance. Men learned that violence alone could not control those who had mastered themselves. The inmate returned to his quiet routine, eating alone, walking alone, and observing silently. His presence became a reminder that appearances lie, and silence can conceal immense power. Discipline, patience, and observation had rewritten the rules of the block. This story transcends prison walls. It reflects a universal truth about strength and perception. The world often equates noise, dominance, and aggression with power, especially against people of color. Restraint is mistaken for weakness, patience ignored until it becomes undeniable. Systems may label and underestimate, yet identity and skill are never truly erased. He changed the block not through domination but by refusing to be controlled. His mastery lay in enduring, observing, and acting only when necessary. True strength, as he demonstrated, needs no announcement or validation. In the end, the inmate's life inside the prison remained mostly a mystery to others. He shared nothing of championships, mentors, or the years of training that had shaped him. Those truths were private, belonging only to him, a silent foundation for his survival. Inside these walls, he was simply a man serving time quiet, controlled, and untouchable. Yet his example shifted the culture subtly, teaching an unspoken lesson about respect, caution, and the power of restraint. The gang leader learned that intimidation has limits. The inmate showed that mastery of oneself transcends walls and fear.